Hello, sixth graders. This is Mr. Lopez, your English teacher, with our poetry collection 4 for today. So very excited to share these wonderful poems with you. And so I'm going to invite you to either get out your book or I'm going to share my screen to show you these wonderful poems. And these poems are going to be in your textbook. And again, this is poetry collection number 4. And let's go ahead and get started with these wonderful poems, which begin, of course, in your book on page 551. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you'll get to see how awesome these poems are this morning. All right, so the first poem is by Sandra Cisneros. She wrote a bunch of other cool stuff. Most importantly, she's known as the woman who wrote The House on Mango Street, which is a cool little book about a street and where people live and their little stories, little vignettes. So this first poem is called Abuelito Who, and if you're familiar with Spanish, you know an abuelito is a grandpa. Abuelito who throws coins like rain and asks who loves him, who is dough and feathers, who is a watch and glass of water, whose hair is made of fur, is too sad to come downstairs today, who tells me in Spanish, you are my diamond, who tells me in English, you are my sky, whose little eyes are string, can't come out to play, sleeps in his little room all night and day, who used to laugh like the letter K, is sick, and a doorknob tied to a sour stick, is tired, shut the door, doesn't live here anymore, is hiding underneath the bed, who talks to me inside my head, is blankets and spoons and big brown shoes, who snores up and down and up, and down up and down again, is the rain on the roof that falls like coins, asking who loves him, who loves him who. So a couple of features to point out from this poem. You'll notice that there isn't a lot of rhyming in this poem that happens with it. A couple of things that also I wanted to point out is this feature where Sandra Cisneros, the poet, is talking about her grandfather, but she doesn't really repeat that little phrasing, right? So let's take a look at it again. So the entire premise of this poem is that everything that she's describing is about the grandfather, right? So grandpa who throws coins and asks, Abuelito who is dough and feathers, right? And then another thing to point out is that this is a really great example of a metaphor, right? So she's saying that the grandfather is these other things. He's not like these other things. He is like this other element, right? So dough, when you think about dough in terms of baking, right? What are we thinking about? Exactly, right? It's like lumpy or like kind of soft and you can kind of move it, right? And then when she says, he's like feathers, right? So what does that bring to mind? Exactly, right? Soft or light or kind of just, floaty or something, right? So good. So he is dough and feathers. He's delicate. Who is a watch and glass of water? His items that he has, perhaps a little glass of water by the bedstand. Whose hair is made of fur, right? Again, soft. This whole idea that the grandpa, I keep trying to say grandpa, is delicate and very kind of, not necessarily old, but just kind of delicate. All right, so the next poem that we're going to read today is called The World is Not a Pleasant Place to Be. Sounds very apt for what's going on today in the world. And let's go ahead and read it. The World is Not a Pleasant Place to Be by Nikki Giovanni. The world is not a pleasant place to be without someone to hold and be held by. A river would not stop its flow if only a stream were there to receive it. An ocean would never laugh if clouds weren't there to kiss her tears. The world is not a pleasant place to be without someone. So again, another couple of interesting little features to highlight in the poem, right? So this poem is a very great example of something called free verse. So free verse is when you have poetry that doesn't have any sort of necessarily very strict rhyme scheme. The stanzas can be long or short. And as a matter of fact, it kind of just looks like a kind of random collection of ideas. It doesn't really have that like sing-songy kind of like, da 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 da. It doesn't sound like a poem necessarily, right? So this is what they call free verse. It doesn't really have a set rhyme or meter, and it just kind of flows, free flow. And again, the world is not a pleasant place to be. Here is a great example of alliteration, right? And alliteration, for those of you that remember, is when you have the repetition of consonant sounds, right? So, pa, pa, pleasant place, right? And it's making that sound to kind of give you a sound effect to kind of keep your attention with the poem. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and so the last poem for you this morning is by Theodore Rothke. Very short poem. You'll notice that it's only one stanza, okay? And again, just by looking at the ends of the lines, it's not going to have rhyme, but it is still a poem. Child on top of a greenhouse. And again, a greenhouse is a structure used in gardening, made out of glass, that people use to grow things in, right? So just even the title already is telling you that there's a kid on top of a delicate piece of property or a greenhouse, right? And so you're thinking, what the heck's that kid up to? On top of a roof that's made out of glass that's dangerous. I'm already imagining this kid falling, so let's see what happens. Child on top of a greenhouse. The wind billowing out the seat of my breeches. Those are pants. The wind billowing out the seat of my breeches. My feet crackling splinters of glass and dried putty. The half-grown chrysanthemums staring up like accusers. Up through the street glass flashing with sunlight. A few white clouds all rushing eastward. A line of elms plunging and tossing like horses. And everyone pointing up and shouting, right? Because again, there's a kid up on the ceiling and everyone's kind of looking like, hey, look, what the heck? And so you'll notice that in this poem, he's describing the moments on that ceiling, on that roof. Up to the street glass, flashing with sunlight. So I don't know if you're getting this sense of him falling necessarily, but this line here might give us a clue. My feet crackling splinters of glass and dried putty. And again, putty is like a little Play-Doh kind of like sticky stuff that holds glass together, two panes of glass together. So that's why when this kid's on top of the greenhouse, he's noticing all the details of how it's put together. So, all right, everybody, have a great day. Hope you've enjoyed the poems, and let's get to answering those questions for the poems. Thank you so much.